Okay, recording has started, and the task for this week is to, or was to, go over the encounter editor and come up with, wait, let me get my note. Come up with ideas and suggestions for, well, actually several things. General discussion of what is needed to make it acceptable, plus general conclusion as to whether it is something that you would actually be willing to use. Oops, here's Joho. Any comments or questions on the encounter editor? Whoop, here's Mark Laurosini, good. Does anybody have anything to say about the encounter editor? First, what things do you think it lacks or needs in order to be a useful tool?
Didn't we discuss this?
Yes, and I was hoping to release a new version. However, I realized that the next step is to get a proper rehearsal feature, and we can't do a rehearsal until I have a sample story world that has a number of encounters in some sort of sequencing structure. And I went to work on that and realized that I needed to do some fundamental rethinking. In fact, let me walk you through that process. I ended up writing a long essay on my website on the subject and the problem. See, the rehearsal system is, it turns out, profoundly different from all of the other systems, including the Storytron technology. And the differentiating factor is something I call consequentiality. That is the logic or process or algorithm by which one event leads to another event. Now, I'm going to consider three interactive storytelling technologies. The first group are the text adventure, interactive fiction, that whole, it's a large genre with a lot of variations in it. But the basic structure of all of these is that of a group of rooms interconnected to make a directed graph. Actually, it's undirected because you can move in any direction. And so you just move around through this network of rooms. Now, the rooms don't have to be physical rooms, although in the great majority of these products, they really do represent physical locations. They are populated with various props and so forth, and the basic structure of the simple ones is you go into this room and look around, you find a key, and you use the key in another room to open a door, which lets you into a third room, and blah, blah, blah. You bounce all around, picking up the various props to use them elsewhere. That's the simple structure. The experience of the person in this product, in this genre, is still that of a tree. That is, although there is an internal data structure that's a graph, what you experience is you start here and you've got some choices, and you pick choice, door B, and you go through that, and now you've got more choices, and now you select door G, and basically you go through all these choices. You experience it as a tree. Okay, the Storytron technology uses a generally similar structure with two big differences. First, the elements of the graph are verbs, not spatial locations. So you go from one action to another action instead of one location to another location. The other difference is that the Storytron technology has a much larger selection of global variables. That is, in the text adventure, you have these global variables about whether you possess the key or the chainsaw, or have you irritated the salamander, whatever. These are the global variables, and typically there aren't that many of them. In the Storytron technology, there's a huge set of these global variables, and you are modifying them with everything you do. So, however, in each case, the decision you make at one point directly determines what happens next. Your choice here decides where you end up immediately thereafter. There's a direct cause and effect relationship, or perhaps I should say, I prefer the term consequentiality. So there's this sequence of events or places that is directly derived, determined by the choice you make at each point. And in fact, games are the same basic structure. Here you are in the middle of a game and you choose to, shoot the gun, and that leads to a direct result. Again, there's this direct relationship between actions and consequences. Such is not the case with the encounter system. The encounter system is radically different and will be very confusing to most people, because consequentiality is indirect, and in fact, there is no apparent consequentiality. That is, in the encounter system, there's a long sequence of encounters, and they're not actually lined up as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Instead, each one occupies a space in a time window. So you can say this one is here, this one is there, this one is here, and there's a lot of overlap between them. The engine then runs through picking randomly or semi-randomly, picking encounters. It doesn't just go through them all. The whole idea of this is that there are so many encounters that you'll go through once and experience maybe half of them. Then you go through another time and experience some more. And you have to go through it multiple times to develop an understanding of the story world in which you are operating. And so presumably at some point in your third playthrough, you say, oh, I get it. That's why she's so sensitive about blah, blah, blah. So, so there's this jumping around. There's a general forward motion, but it's semi-random. There are a number of logical constraints on consequentiality. First, there is the time window constraint, which is fairly loose. Next is the, prerequisite constraint, which says, no. Before the engine can select this particular encounter, that one must have taken place already. And so this is a prerequisite for that. There are also, what do I call them? Not disablers. Whatever, there's a class of events where if this happens, then this cannot happen. For example, if you want to ride the horse, a prerequisite is that you get the horse. Somebody has to give you a horse. Disabler, still can't remember the word. Disqualifier, thank you, would be if the horse dies, then no, you can't ride a dead horse. So those are the kinds of things, those are fairly, you're not going to use them very often, but they're available to prevent really silly situations. Then there's a third or a fourth factor that can affect consequentiality, and that is a button called consequence. And that's the one place where you can directly specify If this encounter takes place, then that encounter must follow. So you can set up sequences of encounters, should you so choose. But here's the really wild thing about the encounter system, the feedback process. Now, here we get into something called the learning curve. And this is old game design theory. We've known it for 30 years now. Basic idea is every game has a learning curve. And the learning curve is actually a series of steps. And the idea is that learning curve should not be too steep, or it scares off the player. Also, no individual step should be too high. So the ideal is a whole bunch of little bitty steps, and the player slowly gets better and better and better as playing the game. And so that's the ideal towards which we strive. And certainly we can just totally dismiss any game that violates this. Well, encounter systems completely violate it. Well, not totally, but strongly violated, because the only global variables that you are changing as the player moves through the encounters are the relationships of other people towards the player. And those relationships are changing by small increments. That is, to use an example I've used elsewhere, if you're wooing the girl and you give her flowers, that isn't followed by let's get married. That's one small step in a long process. And here we come to something that is very important about stories that is not in games. This is a fundamental difference between games and stories, and this is going to cause big problems with the game's audience. That is, the game's audience expects clear, logical consequences. They want to know, if I do this, then I want to see that happen. Or what happens if I do this? I need to know. Stories don't work that way. There's no, in the story, if the guy gives the girl flowers, he doesn't really know what the effect of that's going to be. It's just probable. But what happens in most stories is this, whoops, I'm sorry, Lorenzo, I didn't see you. There we go. Sorry, Lorenzo, I didn't see your request there. Let's see, so where was I? So in games, there's this really steady learning process where you learn one little rule at a time. Oh, if I cock the gun first, it'll shoot, or if I don't, it won't shoot, or, all these little rules, and you learn them one by one in a small, steady sequence, and it's all very logical. Stories don't work that way. In stories, the relationship between causes and effects is there's a lot of distance between causes and effects. The bad guy doesn't get his comeuppance the first time he does something villainous. He gets his comeuppance at the end of the story, after it's all done. Finally, at the end, the villain gets what he had coming. So there are, in romantic comedies, in fact, let me step back here and talk about two types of movies and the gender specialization in them. Let's talk about two classic genres, the action movie and the romantic
Chris,
comedy. Yes?
I'm just curious. What's the problem?
With what?
Like, you're discussing a problem in the structure of the encounter system, right?
Yep. I'm discussing a difference. I'm explaining something about the encounter system that's going to strike you guys as just wrong, wrong, wrong. This can't work. It's wrong. And I'm presenting the reason why I think this is actually a step forward.
But so far, what you're explaining seems perfectly reasonable.
Oh, okay. Well, let me jump ahead to the conclusion, and let's see if everybody says it's perfectly reasonable. as you play through an encounter system, you will experience all sorts of things happening, and you will make all sorts of decisions, and you will see very little effect of your decisions until much later. Towards the end, all of a sudden, those decisions will finally start coming home. I accidentally happened upon this with Le Morte d'Arthur, and I thought it was something special about Le Morte d'Arthur. And I now realize that it is, in fact, fundamental to the whole architecture of encounter story worlds. In Le Morte d'Arthur, you as King Arthur, you spend the first 25% of the experience just encountering the world, not actually making any really serious decisions. It's just things are happening and you're saying, oh, golly gee, isn't that strange? And you go through experiencing things, and then in the middle half or so of the story, you are starting to make decisions. Initially, they're fairly minor. Later on, they start getting really tricky. You have to administer justice between different factions in conflict, and you end up, one side's going to win and the other's going to lose, and they're going to get mad at you. You're going to face challenges in subordination. How strongly do you react to somebody who doesn't obey your commands? And so it'll get tougher and tougher, but even then you still don't have any real idea of how well you're doing until at a point maybe 80 or no, more like 90% of the way through, right at the end, your illegitimate son Mordred declares a rebellion, says King Arthur is incompetent, he's an old doddering fool, I deserve to be king, I'm rebelling, who's with me? And people will choose up sides based on your performance. And some people will turn on you and go over to Mordred, and some will stick with you. And the thing is, the two armies will then have a battle. And if you've maintained the loyalty of most of the people, then you'll have a bigger army and you'll win. And if you have not, if many people are dissatisfied with your performance, then they'll go over to the other side and you'll lose the battle and die. And so basically you go through this whole thing without really knowing what you're doing. And there will be nothing there saying, yeah, that was the right thing to do. No feedback. And then at the very end, you'll get your feedback. And the odds are you'll just lose the first time. And then you go back and do it a second time. And you get better. So this is very ungame-like. And I don't know, what do you guys feel? Does this seem perfectly reasonable to you?
I don't think.
Oh,
Please go ahead.
you can go ahead.
I also don't see it as a problem. We have games like the walking simulators, which have like the first time you encounter this type of game, you have to learn how it operates, but then you just play it, you just walk around. There is no challenge in the conventional sense. We have games like visual novellas, which basically work in a similar way, a simpler way, but still a similar where you have some outcome at the end, but you are not really sure how you are doing during the gameplay. You also said that there is no feedback, but there would be the faces. You would see how the people react to the choices you make. At least I think that it's still in the plans.
Perhaps.
And
mostly the facial expressions will be indicative of the situation that you are encountering, whether they shift to show their emotional reaction is still up in the air. I would actually prefer to have that, but I'm not sure that it'll be possible. I don't know.
The situation that
it
you're
would be one of
describing.
the most
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think it would be it would be one of the most important features to have in a game, to have this kind of feedback. And the way I think I would solve what you are thinking about is just by framing the game as an experience that is aimed at different kinds of skills, like not reason skills, not logic skills, but people skills, like trying to interpret the emotions and the internal state of the characters. And now getting back to the faces, this would be like a crucial feature in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I very much
I think
like
that the faces
Go ahead.
potentially. Is it?
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say regarding the. Oh. Yeah, actually, you've waited multiple times, Mark. If you want to go ahead.
Mark, why don't you go ahead and then Joe?
Oh, okay, sure. What was I going to say? The problem of a lack of feedback that might be there, or the concern that people might be turned off by it. The situation you're describing sounds like where players usually get frustrated by that kind of situation. I feel like usually happens not because they don't understand what they're doing, but because they don't understand how to progress.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't understand this tool. I don't know what to do to get more of the game. But this is a different situation where all you have to do to progress is mostly read and then choose one of the options.
Yes.
So even though if you don't know what exactly is most optimal or how the system inside the computer works at first, players will still be optimally, hopefully, the story will be interesting enough to have players be interesting in the story and what's happening, even if they don't understand what to do. Will definitely understand what to do to go forward in the story. Where a lot of frustration in games comes in is there's all these tools and I don't know what to do with them to do anything.
Yeah.
To go forward.
Well, I've given up on the general games community. That is, I don't think we should even try to appeal to them. This is just completely different. We might as well accept the fact it'll be a different audience. My concern is with you. As game designers, you live in that universe, and I fear that this aspect of the encounter system will be very off-putting to you and may well prevent you from working with it.
What's off-putting about it?
Well, the fact that it is so unconventional in terms of consequentiality. You don't get that clear relationship between action and consequence.
Well, it sounds like to me it is clear, it's just delayed, right?
Well, no, see, when you get one encounter, the subsequent encounter will likely have absolutely nothing to do with the previous one. I mean, you're going to bounce around from, all sorts of, from one event to a completely different one. And the relationships will only show up over the long term. And I feel very strongly this is the way movies work. This is the way most stories work. Not all movies, action movies have the direct consequentiality, but romantic comedies and most serious literature has very long-term relationships, causal relationships. So again, does that bother you? Do you feel like, ew, this isn't a game?
I think
I think
Go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say, I think that the crucial thing is as long as the outcomes don't feel random, like as long as there's almost like a setup, like you can, like if in what's produced there are like clear indicators of where things are, are progressing, whether that's subtext or there was discussion of writing that describes how other characters react physically, if they raise I'm trying to think of an example. I can't think of the characters. Guinevere cocked an eyebrow or something like that. Like if you had it in writing, like
Yes, yes.
I don't think you need like an actual tool to if anything, letting the user imagine that is a better tool. I would argue would save you a lot of time.
Okay.
Also, having the coincidentality be based on the emotional states of the characters that are most controllable by the player will probably result in encounters that, even if maybe they're not immediately one-to-one with the choices that the player is making, but maybe they'll have a feeling of being more connected to the way the player is deciding to play.
Okay.
Rather than if they were based on some other parameter that wasn't as close to the variables that the player is controlling.
Somebody got,
Also, real quick.
wait, somebody got over, they didn't get their chance to speak. Who was that? You, Neil?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what's been said. That as long as it can be events can be traced backwards, it makes sense. But I think also that part of that will be in the writing. Though there'll be perhaps a longer divide than what is normal for games between setup and payoff. Oftentimes in good stories, while the long-term setup happens, there's also like a shorter, like a chapter, where that chapter happens and has a setup and payoff within it, while also setting up longer-term things. And I think that by doing that and mastering that within games and mastering that pacing, it'll be far easier to keep momentum that we would need to keep people engaged while we make that longer term setup.
Yeah, it's still, even with the perfect system, it should be still very possible to write a bad story in the encounter editor.
Well, yeah.
So there is a certain degree of responsibility of the author to do a lot of the things that you're worried about.
Yes, yes.
And not the job of the system to do it 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's I guess one thing about the player experience that I'm trying to understand is the idea of replayability, right? That if the story becomes replayed too many times, or perhaps even just a couple of times, I can see a shift in the player mentality, whereas instead of responding to it as a story, respond to it as
States. Just trying to get the states.
And you try to then optimize it as opposed to respond to it as you would a book or a movie.
Yeah.
And I was curious how you thought about perhaps fixing that.
If there was like a soap opera sort of encounter, at the start of the episode where they go like, they'll have a character and it's like, oh, I'm so upset Maria is in the hospital and this person cheated on this person. And it's like the audience is filled in through a character telling, the audience about the world from their perspective. If
One
you
way
had
that
an
you could,
encounter that did that, then the character is filled in on the personal states.
a really good way that you could do that thematically with this game is you could have a bard that gives like a summary, in tune of like what's happened in the previous sections, pretty concisely.
There is actually soap operas, the Storytron technology is very well suited to soap operas because they are very formulaic, very repetitive in style, and almost mechanical in the way they work. And that's well suited, or the Storytron technology is well suited to that. This type of, the encounter system is more appropriate to a more text-heavy approach with stories that are, have a linearity to them, but only a few possible outcomes. That's another critical difference here. With encounter story worlds, you're really only going to have a small set of possible outcomes, and you'll end up gravitating towards one or the other. Romantic comedy, either they get married and live happily ever after, or they don't. That's the only thing that matters in a romantic comedy. So George had asked a question about whether encounters play twice. Yes, my overall guess is, or my hope is to have, let us say 200 encounters in an entire story world, with statistically the player experiencing about half of them on any given playthrough. So the first time the player experiences 100, the second time the player will experience approximately 50 new ones, the third time about 25 new ones, and 75 repeats. Yeah, there will be a certain repetitiveness to them, but it just depends on the ratio of encounters in the story world to the number of encounters that the player will actually experience. The higher that ratio, the less repetitive the experience will be. But there's a question I'd like to put to you, and that concerns the global variables. There is really only one global variable, or three, of any significance in the encounter story world system as currently devised, and that are the p-values of the actors towards the protagonist. The only thing that matters is how people feel about you. And clearly that is far and away the most important factor, but should it be the only factor? In particular, should it also permit p-values between the different actors, so that you can get into situations where there is conflict between two actors and you're caught in the middle?
I think that is possibly a feature for version 2.0 or beyond.
Okay.
I guess it depends on the story. As far as the actual application goes, is there any loss to putting in those variables and just letting the author decide how they want to use them?
Yes, there is, because the author could make a story world that's too complicated at first. Really, it's a matter of simplification, and that's the necessity of simplification is what led me to that. But I worry, have I oversimplified?
One example, I'm thinking of something like Prom Week here, where you manipulate things on a more global scale to manipulate the relationships between all the characters. Something a player might want to do is make character A and character B fall in love with each other. It's very popular in media, like to have shipping, like, oh, I want that character to go out with that character. I want that character to go out with that character. That might be something that authors might really want to have happen, rather than just manipulate how other characters feel about you.
Yeah.
But then again, in the end, what you really might want to do is build something small and see how it feels. Or maybe, because that might answer a lot of these questions that we're tossing around. It might be more clear once we have a really good example to play with.
Yep. I agree. The demo,
Yeah.
the story world is the highest priority. It's just that I ran into these fundamental theoretical issues and I felt I wanted to think them through before proceeding with that. I think I've come to most of my conclusions and I'm almost ready to begin work on a specific story world. So
I feel like those p-values between the different NPCs, like character B and C, are in the tree somewhat. Like you just need to keep track of it in the tree. Like you made this decision, so this person is going to do some action off screen that makes them like this other person. If that action isn't actually happening, like if the NPCs aren't able to give flower as a verb, who cares what those values are if they're not being calculated?
yeah.
With the same rules the player has to do, you know?
Okay. Okay. Good point. Okay. Any other advice for me as I begin work on the demo story world? Oh, wait, here we go from Lorenzo. We need authoring to make a good story. There's no arguing about that. I think that building interactive stories is step one. Building interactive story world will be step two. Lorenzo, what's the differentiation you make between building interactive stories and building interactive story world?
I think it's the difference between building one story that is in a closed area, like the bar scene, the fight scene in the Western bar,
Yeah.
and building a story world that would be all the world around this bar with the city and the desert around it and the multiple hundreds of people living in the city and the political structure, economic complex, you know, all the big stuff. So I think interactive storytelling, as I understand it, is a world, a structure that is so complex and so, I don't know, so cool that it makes its own stories. But before that, we need to make one story that is interactive, like the bar scene that is cool in itself and interactive, and you have possible multiple outcomes, maybe almost infinite outcomes. And then once this is done, we can think about making all the city and everything. But if we can't make a bar scene fun and interactive and interesting in a story world with interesting characters, it's too ambitious to make the story world first and then, you know what I mean? It's too much work to make a story world to prove the point that the bar scene is working. We need to make the bar scene, so an interactive story. And if this is working, an interactive story world around it, like maybe level, like Cornell said, step 2, version 2, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe another way of saying that is you have to write the system to the story and not write a system for the story. I mean, you could, but I think you'll probably be more successful if you write the system first, then have the story, instead of making this large story. But I mean, I don't know. Many ways to skin a cat.
Okay. Yeah, we need a play button so we can get right in there and play it. Yes, that's what I'm aiming for. That is, first I get the demo story world. That allows me to activate or to build the whole rehearsal system that has the play button. So that's the idea there. Any other advice for me to consider? Okay, well, I have an assignment and an announcement. We are nearing the end of this course. So what I would like you to do for next week let me bring up my browser here. Go to the Erasmus website and then go to the pages that have the lessons. And if you look at the lessons, it stops at lesson 23. Please basically read the remaining lessons. Now, here's the funny thing. There are a lot more than 23 lessons. That is, if you go to lesson 23, conclusions, you'll find one little link there to another lesson. This is the only way to get to it. It's called Stepping Back, a Larger View. And you go to that, and there's another lesson, example, Gossip 2013, and it expands on some ideas there and talks about the blend operator in more detail. And then there's another one about the multi-dimensional analysis, and another one after that about getting into multi-MDA for more characters. And then there's another one about statements of affinity. And then there are a whole bunch of short things. The reason I didn't put them in the index is that they're all incomplete. But I show you how to nest clauses, which allows you to make deals, which allows you to do a set of verbs I call request, recommend, and demand. So I'm asking you just read all of that, and next week we will discuss it all. Then I'm hoping I will have, oh wait, here's a question. What is the difference between a story world and a story? Process. A story is data. A story is an object. It's a fixed thing. We have a book, this is a story, or we have a movie, an old-fashioned reel-to-reel film or a videotape or a DVD or whatever. It's an object. But a story world is interactive. It's a set of algorithms and data that together you can interact with. And so the fundamental difference between a story and a story world is process, which is why I started this whole course off on this long thing about process versus object. And this is really fundamental because I have failed repeatedly trying to get professional story writers to understand interactive storytelling because they're stuck in this notion of a story as an object. And they just can't get beyond that and think of a story, of the process of storytelling. That's the big distinction there. Anyway, I'm going to try to have something for you next week. So next week we will discuss the remaining lessons. And if I've gotten that thing working, then I'll hand that out to you and we can discuss that the week afterwards. But there is a transition, an end point coming, at which time I will you graduate into a discussion board I set up about a year ago about interactive storytelling. And it has been basically dead for nearly a year now. It's classic discussion board stuff, lots of excitement at first and then interest dies out. Well, I've got three things that will add a lot of energy to it. First will be this class joining, and then there will be the Sunday class joining, but the big thing will be the encounter system actually having working stuff that people can play with, and then we can argue about, problems with it, improvements, how to do it, and so forth. So that's the long-term plan. We're looking 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road. So we're going to finish early today. Any last questions, comments, arguments, discussions, whatever?
Yeah.
Do
you can go ahead, whoever that was.
Yeah, just do you we talked some weeks ago about the idea of continuing this course. Do you think it's going to be just over in 4 weeks, or do you see it continuing? I don't know.
Basically, it will continue on the Thaddeus discussion board. Basically, although the problem is that's a standard text discussion board. And there is a lot to be said for the Zoom meetings where we have interaction and ideas pop up and so forth. We may need to set up some of those. The difficulty is finding a common time for everybody. We may have to continue this process of, 2 different times per week. So yes, I may indeed continue, but it would not be the course. It would be the seminar.
Yeah, so the same thing every week, this hour, and for the Sunday class, their Sunday hour, and then it's just the same, but we just instead of interactive storytelling 101, it's 102, and we practice and we make some stuff.
Well, the difference would be that I would not be taking such a dominant role. That is, it only works if you guys are actually working with the technology, doing things, and coming back and saying, I just did this, and this doesn't work, and I need, anybody have any ideas on how I might fix this? Or, maybe the encounter editor needs to be improved, whatever. I see it as a working seminar for people actually using the technology. Or maybe, I still don't know about this, if somebody develops their own technology and they want to talk about it and get ideas. So the the theme is interactive storytelling. So somebody else had a comment.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on this idea that players, when replaying, won't be able to replay interactive story worlds as stories and will instead interact with them as systems. And do you understand what I mean? And do you think that's a...
Please expand.
So, for instance, like when I think of what would you call it? Like a choices matter game where the story becomes a branching path. In those games, perhaps the first time around, it's easy to get invested in the story, but the second time around, it becomes more a process of just understanding how the game is wired to be versus interacting with the characters on an emotional and social level. And instead, it becomes reducing it to a more algorithmic thing.
Okay, I see your point. The overly mechanical. That is, are you second guessing algorithms or are you actually interacting with people? I'll point out that the extreme indirection of this system and the fact that change takes place in small increments will make it difficult to figure out algorithms. You're not going to be able to, even if you took careful records of every action you took, I don't think you would be capable of reverse engineering all the algorithms. They're just too complicated. So I agree. If it feels mechanical, then it's inadequate. The result should feel like you're acting intuitively. Why is this character reacting to me the way he is? And you're trying to figure out the personality factors at work rather than calculating some sort of algorithms.
What does the player say to himself before he replays the game? Is it like, oh, I want to be a bad guy this time, and then he'd go for a second playthrough?
Well, in Le Morte d'Arthur, The player will probably say, damn it, Mordred got, all those people went over to him and I got killed. How can I go through this thing?
Outcomes.
Yeah, how can I get the outcome I want?
I imagine it'd be something along those lines.
I'm sorry? I mean, there will be very few outcomes. If it's a romantic comedy, then, you know, either the guy and the gal get together and get married and live happily ever after, or they don't. Similarly with L'Amour d'Arthur, either you win the final battle or you don't. So they could indeed just be plain binary outcomes. You know, either you just win or lose, you know, that blatant. Oh, Lorenzo asks, you guys interested in continuing this until the end of the health crisis? I'm certainly willing to host it as a symposium. You know, I think I've pretty much reached the end of the formal course material, although we could open it up to, you know, there's an enormous amount of material on my website, and if you wanted, we could make it sort of an ask me anything type of thing for essays on my website. But again, I'm, you know, let's see what you guys want to do. I'm open to different ideas.
I think it'd be great to continue the group, but if possible, I don't know if this works for him, but like an hour or two earlier, if possible, because where I am in Singapore, everything is starting to open up, and it's getting a little harder for me to be up at this time.
Yeah, I would really like to have an East Asia time, because there are a number of Chinese people who have expressed an interest, but just can't quite get a critical mass. So again, maybe if we, you know, advertise it on Facebook or tweet it or whatever, maybe we could build up a critical mass. You know, maybe we could have 3 time settings. We have a Sunday, a Wednesday, and a Friday. I don't know.
Maybe we could like you did your lectures on YouTube. You made you edited videos. It took a long time, but the message is you can get the message anytime because it's on YouTube and you can watch it when you want.
Yeah.
Maybe we could mutualize all the your ideas and the ideas that other people in this class developed and make kind of a video production. So we have a you know, we make, for example, at the end of this class, the plan to make, I don't know, a 5 or 10 minute video that synthesized all the ideas we had, and then we can maybe step 2 would be, I don't know, Mark is explaining to us his prototype for 1 hour, and then Cornell is explaining to us his vision of a game he made for 1 hour, like small conferences.
Oh, that's a great idea. I could found a conference and then get the thing started, and we could all get together and have fun.
Oh, geez.
Have any of these
PDC 2.0.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
the other gamers.
I'm happy to you know, act as the seed for crystallizing all of this, and yeah, if you guys want to put something together, you know, go ahead and put together a plan, or no, a proposal, because, you know, there's another class and they have their ideas, and so we'll need to organize it. Again, I think the place to actually organize it, though, will be on this discussion board that I set up, because there are a lot of other people there. And so, yeah, the idea of a video symposium conference thing, I think it's a great idea. I'll start thinking about how to do that. And so really, this is an even bigger task for you. Figure out what happens after the class, after we are no longer a class with Professor Crawford, and we're more of a symposium. So.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful because we've all spent a lot of time like getting our definitions the same. Like we all know what like prop, actor, like these are common verbiages. So that's a lot of time cut out of any discussion about these games. Just that piece alone is pretty powerful.
In fact, there was a paper proposal for, there is an academic conference on interactive storytelling every year. And I sometimes act as a referee for the papers. And there was one paper saying, hey, let's all get a universal set of terminology, which was a good idea. Unfortunately, they were trying to do it in a very democratic way. And ultimately, language is a democratic system. But really, the way these things actually happen is that somebody gets the ball rolling and sort of sets up the first, the starting point, and then other people do incremental improvements on it. And so I think we're going to end up using my terminology as the core. And then, for example, I know I should use character to describe the person, the dramatis personae, but I keep using actor because it is specific to interactive storytelling. I think it's a narrower term that I just find it being more precise for my own usage. So I'm willing to be overruled on that one, though. The whole world uses character, so we'll take a big vote at some point.
Before we go, I do want to ask a question that's relative to my own work that I'm doing right now. In my prototype, I've decided to take a step back and rework the system a little bit. And my challenge right now is I am trying to put action and reaction, or effect and consequence, into mathematical terms and numbers. Just curious if you've had any failures or experimentation in doing that.
Well, yeah, I read the thing you sent, and the idea of the matrix and matrix results, and yes, that can definitely work. I suppose my reaction was, you're going to have to sweat a lot more blood before we can make adequate predictions or estimates of the likeliness of this being useful. That is the problem with interactive storytelling. It is so complicated that you can start off with a good idea and develop it, and much later on realize it stinks. And you can't tell that it stinks until after you've built a lot of it. So I don't know what to recommend here, other than, sure, go ahead.
I've been iterating over and over, so.
Pardon?
I've been iterating over and over on the deep ideas, so hopefully I don't get too off track building something that doesn't work. But I mean, it's always, the solution to the problem is always so it's, I don't know. I feel like I'm making progress though, but yeah, I totally get what you mean. It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of complication.
I will say this, from what I read, I get people coming up with ideas and suggestions, 90% of which are crap. And I will say, yours is not crap.
Well, thank you.
Isn't that wonderful? So that's actually really good, because most people's ideas about interactive storytelling really are awful. It's really sad, pathetic. So this has potential. I'll wait until you've put a few more years of work into it before I tell you that it's craft.
Okay, sure.
Okay, do you want me to leave the meeting? I've got to go here. Do you want me to leave the meeting open for continued discussion?
Lorenzo, maybe you want to,
Yeah.
you've been
I-
wanting to do after discussions
Or
and
do you
such.
just want to do it on Discord?
Yeah, you could let it open, but my connection is bad, so I can't take I don't know, control of the meeting because I might lose
Oh,
connection.
yeah, that's right.
But if someone is up for the talk, we could talk in here, just right here.
Okay.
And
My connection is also dreadful.
Yeah.
You can give it to me, Chris.
Not going to be on me.
Well, let me suggest that email would probably be, because of these timing issues, Neil needs to, has to go here. I suggest that you live with the slower process of email. So anybody who wants to put their email address up in the chat zone, please feel free.
Either that or the Discord. There's a voice chat in there, I think, isn't there?
I don't know.
yeah.
All right, I'm going to head
Okay,
off.
why don't you use the Discord address for starters, and then you can take it from there.
Right. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Chris. Take care.
Okay, see you next week,
Thank you.
and we'll start talking about launching a seminar.
Nice.
See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.